Wizkid's first album, Superstar, just turned 10. So this episode, we're talking about the legacy of the album, who Wizkid was before the album, during the album, and after the album. So before Superstar, who was Wizkid?
Wizkid was this studio rat, Sulere boy, that Neola found and took to Banky W because Neola is an OG who was on Tribe's record and was on EME, right? He, on MI's debut album, that was when a lot of people, like people in the industry, some people in the industry already knew him, especially the bigger artists, because you would encounter him one way or the other. That's the conversation. And there was even a conversation where Clarence Peters came here some days ago that he was meant, some months ago that he was meant to sign Wizkid. Yeah, Clarence Peters said he was meant to sign Wizkid. That, but because all of them were family, Wizkid was always rolling with Night House. He was on Capital Dream. He was also shooting Love for EME at the time. Clarence Peters said he almost signed Wizkid, but when Night House also looked into it, they were like, okay, Banky, go with Banky, everything will be fine. And then he went with Banky, and look where he is right now. Before then, young kid, fresh-faced, everybody liked him. The moment you see him, he doesn't have beard, he still doesn't have beard. Young for life. Banky W, shout out to him, killed the A&R, killed the branding, killed the everything, the way they rolled out that album. That was, at the time, Wizkid became a template without even realizing it became a template. They branded him properly. First single, Oh Holla At Your Boy. Before then, they had some Lucy's, some Mami Water, some songs here and there. And it was Young Prince before. Some songs were also on the internet at the time. But when he became Wizkid, Oh Holla At Your Boy gave him the branding of a school kid. All the teenage girls going crazy. It was also an era in American pop where Justin Bieber was coming up. All these things were working and they really transported it here. Shot a video for him, it was in school, fantastic. Ice Prince was in it. Ice Prince and Skills were riding bikes, you remember? In that video. Branding on point. Second single, Tease Me Bad Guys. They shelved all of that away, all of the school things, they shelved it away. They had found the teenage market. I remember when Sasha was talking, they were doing a King of the New School episode on MTV Base in like 2010. And Sasha was saying, Wizkid was, despite the fact that he was fresh in the industry, he was on that list that was stopped by Don Jazzy, I'll never forget. Sasha said something like, oh, the VJ asked Sasha that, what do you think about Wizkid? She was like, Wizkid looks, his main attraction is that he looks like a guy that you want to just buy ice cream and tell him to go and sit down there. That was the perception. But what did Banky and the team do the next one? He wore a suit and he shot it in a strip club. Master stroke. Another market opened. The third single was third single was London. Opened them to the street audience. The fourth, after the album dropped, they did Pakurumo. What happened to Pakurumo? Pakurumo opened the Owambe market, and that was how Wizkid catapulted. The album drops.
Okay. What was the state of Nigerian music at that time? Just at the time of Wizkid's rollout, the Holla At Your Boy before the album, what was the state at that time in terms of pop music and?
Well, shout out to Osagi Arunge on his episode, on his podcast, The Music in Time, where this album was. They did a proper breakdown of this album. Fantastic. You should check it out if you have time. The episode of Nigerian music was coming off the era of we had found our mainstream pop sound. The industry that we currently enjoy basically started around 1999. Like the sound, the packaging, the branding. But at the time, the early days of hip hop and R&B, by mid-2000s, 4 albums dropped. Timaya's True Story, 90s Gongaso, Wandiko, Soshi Mois, and the band's Entertainer. They formed the crux of the Nigerian mainstream pop sound. However, between 2008 and 2010, Nigeria also had the golden era. We also had the golden era of Nigerian hip hop. Albums dropped, MI was winning Mamas and all these other things. Wizkid was a product of what happened right after that. However, what happened in 2019 was happening in 2010. You remember in 2019 we didn't have hits, a lot of artists were in contemplation, things were not happening. There was this hollow that was open, and guess what? Fireboy, Rema, Joe Boy, all of them ran into it. T Classic in the early days, and all of these people, they ran into it because even Good Gelele had a little buzz at the time. It was the same thing that happened in 2010. The old generation, they had made money. The hunger was still there, but you could see that there was this space for hunger, something new. Guess what? Wizkid ran into it. Burna Boy ran into it. Tiwa Savage ran into it. Mo Cheddar ran into it. If anybody remembers correctly, a few other artists ran into it. But guess what? Wizkid, from the moment Wizkid dropped, everybody knew something was especially about this guy. Even Davido has said it countlessly that he looked up to Wizkid. Burna Boy looked up to Wizkid. Everybody looks up. Like, everybody was like, who is this guy? Because you could literally see the talent seeping out of him. And a lot of people also say that, they make the point that if one day Cole's debut album had dropped the same year, and his sophomore album had dropped the same year, it might not have been the same. But because Wizkid is a product of that. Wizkid has never denied that it's a product of the One Cool school of thought. But at the same time, it's not exactly a spitting image of what One Cool was. It's just his style was birthed off what One Cool became in 2009. Those things are very different. But Wizkid, everybody just knew. That was the state of Nigerian music at the time. So Wizkid, a lot of people, Wizkid's Superstar is a classic album. But you can't put it in the conversation of all the albums that formed the pop sound because it came just after them. And even though you can always trace Wizkid's sound, all the sounds on Superstar back to 3 albums. You can trace it back to Nice Congress, you can trace it back to The Branch Entertainer, you can trace it back, especially when it goes pushing to more hits. You can or the sounds, the styles, the topics, and everything, even though Wizkid was different.
Okay. Talking about the album, let's talk about the album.
Yeah.
Good transition to the album. How was the album? Like, how was Superstar as an album?
Superstar was crazy. You remember Superstar? You were already in the industry at the time. Superstar was, everybody was waiting for One Cool's album, sophomore album, but it felt like that album filled that void for a lot of people. And thank God, shout out to Banky W again. The A&R on that album was fantastic. They killed it. Like, they maximized on everything Wizkid. Right now, you are seeing Wizkid's flaws. Right now, Made in Lagos, as much as it's cohesive and it's a really good album, you could also see that they tailored it to Wizkid's strengths. It wasn't tailored to expose Wizkid's flaws. They expanded upon it and they brought it out and made it shine. But if anybody's attentive, you will see that there might have been flaws on the album. For example, his songwriting was not good. The themes on the album was very, very one-dimensional. But on Superstar, there was something like that. The way they structured that album, the sound, Made in Lagos is his most cohesive album, but Superstar was very diverse. You could hear everything on Superstar. Holla at Your Boy was a record that was refixed. Initially produced by Nice House, Temi Gomez had the parts in it, and then DJ Clem reproduced it. Different sound. No need for it's different. All the drums on Don't Do, crazy. How do you talk about that? And then you're talking about Giddy Girl, a record like Giddy Girl, which was an R&B record, which with a pop percussion. You're talking about For Me that merged EDM with elements of Nigerian sound. Those things are crazy. And then shout out to producers as well. I'm talking about J Slick and especially Sam Clef. That was Sam Clef's, aside from Sam Clef's own album, Analyses, that was his finest moment as a producer. Facts only. Even though he did some great work on ICBC's debut album as well, and Molowo, which was his own song, he killed it on that album. J Slick also killed it because you are looking at a record like For Me, even though the mixing of For Me was not great. All the tracks on that album, back to back. When you feel you are tired, you get to Oluwaloni. When you feel you are tired, you get to Word Up. Yeah. And then the drums on No Lele, the sound, you could not help but be sucked into that album. When it felt like the Prince was saying rubbish on Word Up, he started a verse with Who Sat Down Watch My Infant. Who starts a verse like that? And then it felt like Wizkid saw into his own future. A record like No Lele, for example, Wizkid, they found a way to make sure Wizkid's identity was on that album. His identity was there, his realities were there. And then they found a way for him to project into his own future. Amazing stuff. Amazing. Right now, looking back at that album, it's one of the few classics that we've seen over the past 10 years. And that's facts only.
How did you set him up to become Wizkid?
After that album, Wizkid then goes on a ridiculous run. I don't know if you remember. Features, killing it. Wizkid became the most potent features tool in Nigerian music. All Wizkid had to do on your record was, your song is going to blow, don't worry. And it was so wild that some of the songs that were blowing up at the time, people didn't even realize that they were not Wizkid songs. The Beat of Life by SARS. Till today, a lot of people still think it was Wizkid's record. Look at how that record, it was a studio session that became a smash hit record. Jeru's Familiarity, FM Afon Familiarity, was what everybody held on to on that record. Wizkid became the face of Nigerian music. It went from winning Next Twitter to winning BET Awards the next year. How do you do that? From there, it came back from BT. I was released as onto, released as onto. All these things were just going from strength to strength. But at the same time, he was also a very young guy. Certain things started happening, pulling him out of here and there. Had a child, controversies, beef with Davido, beef with this person, all these other things. His first girlfriend, and then the slightly dramatic exit from EME. Some of these things were also there. But at the same time, all those things never, ever, ever, ever erased the legacy of Superstar. And it also became a problem when he released his sophomore album, which was Iron. Because Superstar, this album is not as good as Superstar. Even though it's not a good album, it's not a great album. It's good, maybe average, but it's not a great album. Because the standard that Superstar set was ridiculous. It took Wizkid a while, 3 bodies of work to find him in Lagos. 3 bodies of work. That's crazy.
Okay. Where is Superstar in pop, Nigerian pop sound, the history, like looking back on Two Faces, first 2 albums, so One Day Cool, to Entertainers the Band. Where's Superstar in all
Superstar
of this?
is going to be top 10. There's no way you can take it out. Let's look at the albums that are going to put in there. Obviously, Two Faces back-to-back albums. Obviously, we're not ranking now. Let's talk about back-to-back. Two Faces first 2 albums. We're going to talk about Lumen's and Yahoo's, obviously. Then we're going to talk about those 4 albums. We have 7 albums already. P-Square will have at least 2 albums in that conversation. And then we're talking about Wizkid Superstar. It's complete. That's it. So those are the 4 albums, the 4 horsemen. Yeah. So we're talking about 2 Two-Face albums. We're talking about Yahoo's, Olumentin. We're talking about Timaya's True Story, Timaya's debut album. We're talking about One Day Cool's Mushitumesi. We're talking about Nice's Gongwaso. We're talking about The Bunch Entertainer. Right? P-Square will have at least 2 albums in our conversation. Okay. Easily. Because how do you... 2 albums might even be an understatement. Sure. Might even be an understatement. Maybe in terms of impact, P-Square blew everybody out of the park.
So top 10?
And we are going to put Wizkid Superstar in top 10. Easily.
Top 10?
Easily. Okay. Easily.
You said it's a classic album.
It is a classic album. It's a classic album because, number one, it was a good album, fantastic album. It got to a point where it felt like all the songs on that album became hits. Like they grew a life of their own. You know, these days, before, the songs that were running on charts used to be songs from that were pushed as singles. Now, with the streaming era, you are seeing all the songs Jeko's recent album, all the songs started in the top 100, Billboard top 100. Wizkid, even though we had no chart at the time, it got to a point where all those songs were on radio. All of them were being played. Everybody was playing them. What do you want to say about that album that ever happened? It was critically acclaimed. It was commercially successful. And it's aged really, really, really well.
Okay. Let's talk about the impact of the album. Because we discussed, the place in the history, and we discussed the albums that came before it. Yeah. All of the albums that came after it. Which one do you think measures up or is better?
We have not seen a lot of classics over the past 10 years. A lot of Nigerians don't understand that, especially in the pop space. Now, in the underground space, we are talking about maybe Asha's album, Brimo's albums, all these other things. But in the pop space, we've not seen a lot of classic albums. Now, which albums? Maybe Sean Tizu's debut album.
Yeah.
The Journey. You're talking about Kizanio, New Era. A lot of people will disagree with it, but when you really look at it, you are going to call that album a classic. Yeah. The another album that we're going to talk about is Simi Sola.
Yeah.
And then we are talking about Olamide's Baddest Guy Bad Event. We are talking about Fino's No Gods No Glory. All those albums are the classic albums. Ice Princes, everybody loves Ice Prince. Maybe not. But at the same time, if anybody were to make an argument that it was a classic, you might not be able to argue against it because it had its moments. And then you are going to look at Olamide's 4th album. We are going to look at YBNL, Baddest Guy Bad Event. And the 4th album, that's Street OT. A lot of people might disagree with that actually, but the one Olamide album that you can't disagree with is Baddest Guy Bad Event. And then over the past 3 years, even though we can't say definitively that some albums are classic, African Giants, from Burna Boy's run, even though there was a trifecta, African Giants is likely to be the classic. Even though Twice As Tall the one that won the Grammy, African Giants is the best album in that run. And then we're looking at Olamide's last album, which was Carpe Diem. That album is going to be fantastic as well. And then Fireboy's Laughter, Tears and Goosebumps, easily. easily.
We named Superstar the album of the decade.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, when we
did.
were kind
We
of
did.
why did we do that? Was it because of everything that
Because
you
of
mentioned?
everything that happened. Even though some people were making an argument for Olamide's bad Livet, you can understand it. But Superstar was just too much. Even when we named Wizkid Artist of the Decade, Olamide commented on Pulse's Twitter that if it's Wizkid, then it's fine. Give a shout out to Wizkid. You will see the respect. It's Wizkid. I feel like a lot of people don't realize what that guy is sometimes. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that over the past, before Made in Lagos, things were shaky. You might not want to admit it, but the music struggled a bit. Made in Lagos, played it safe, but that album is probably going to be another person.
So final words, 10 years after, what's the legacy of Superstar? Yeah.
Man, shout out to AOT2, former senior editor at Pulse, now with Opera News. Tweeted something recently that Made in Lagos should be titled Superstar. Superstar should be titled Made in Lagos. Fantastic. That's basically what it is. Because Made in Lagos, that one that was called Made in Lagos was not exactly made in Lagos. Even though it might have been made by a Lagosian, it wasn't made for Lagos. It was made for outside Lagos. And the sound was a refined Lagos sound that was mixed with Caribbean sounds, mixed with high life and then palm wine music. But the sound itself is not a lot of the things that reflected Nigeria. What was Lagos on that album? Even the style was not Lagos. But Superstar was Lagos. 100%. Superstar was made in Surulere. Made in Surulere, grew by someone who grew up on Lagos, who is from Lagos Island, and then distributed or dispersed to the rest of Nigeria. That was what it was. It's an essential album. Some people argue that it's made in Lagos. No, it's not. Shout out to AOT2. That was a fantastic statement. And that's Wizkid's legacy. And that's facts on it.